Oh, wow, they took my video down. Too late. I think I should turn up the intensity a little. In that episode, I deliberately only touched on the subject and stopped there. I did not dig into some of the details. I just wanted to leave a little room so that we could still meet again another day. But for this episode, I am not going to be polite anymore. You guys seemed quite interested in the topic of anti-money laundering. My content is like a sponge. The more you squeeze it, the more you can get out of it. Originally, in the last video, I made a whole plate of dumplings just for that dish of vinegar. So this time, I might as well explain clearly the money laundering routines involving the celebrities everyone most likes hearing about. I also want to warn all of you to take this as a lesson. Do not participate in any illegal or criminal activity. Most celebrities can only be used as tools. They cannot really sit at the capital table. Those who do get onto that table often get hammered and exposed a few years later. For example, there was once the little swallow who had sat at that table. Why can't celebrities sit at the capital table? It is not because I am stopping them from making money. It is because, as a group, celebrities simply should not be at that table. A large number of capital games can only operate in gray areas. Whether they are allowed or not depends on the mysterious powers of the East. Celebrities already have countless eyes on them every day. Every word and action gets magnified. They are already high-profile enough. And the little heads of many celebrities are simply not enough to support them through capital games this complicated. The deeper they enter the game, the easier it is for others to find their weak points, and they often end up handling the situation badly. Doesn't that turn a one-track mind into being blocked at both ends? Some celebrities and tycoons benefited from the dividends of the era, but the money they brought in was not always clean. If they themselves are not sure where they stand, they start thinking about moving assets overseas to escape supervision. Public figures and wealthy people whose Chinese citizenship is clear usually do not dare openly admit that they own property overseas, because you cannot easily explain where the money used to buy those properties came from. Mainland China has strict foreign exchange controls and does not allow individuals to use foreign exchange to invest in overseas real estate projects. Unless the purpose is clearly emigration, in which case one may apply to convert all of one's assets into foreign currency. So, after foreign exchange regulations were tightened again in 2017, in principle, it became impossible for individual Chinese citizens to freely acquire and hold overseas. Otherwise, you have to explain where the money used to buy the property came from, and whether you deliberately transferred assets abroad. But everyone who knows, knows. Rules are rules. Rules that are effective in general do not necessarily work on people in certain classes. Those people have more financial tools in their hands and can mobilize more gray area resources. If you control a multinational listed company, have a professional asset management team, have a very reasonable and compliant reason to purchase real estate in the target country, and the company's cash flow is abundant, then you can carry out operations that ordinary people do not understand. As a former anti-money laundering specialist, let me find a classic case and break it down carefully. How do wealthy people get around supervision? Let's use Xu Jiayin's luxury home case in Britain. In 2022, Britain's Financial Times reported that Xu Jiayin was the actual owner of the 28A Rutland Gate mansion in London's Knightsbridge. This mansion is in one of the most prime and expensive areas in London, less than 1,500 meters in a straight line from Buckingham Palace, the residence of the British Queen. The property changed hands for £210 million, close to RMB 1.9 billion. How did this case come to light? It was because Xu Jiayin's Hong Kong card-playing friend, Zhang Songqiao, bought the mansion through an offshore company from another offshore company controlled by Xu Jiayin's wife. Once the transaction details were disclosed, Xu Jiayin's identity was exposed. Let me first introduce Zhang Songqiao. He also started in real estate and is the founder and chairman of the Hong Kong-listed Zhongyu Land. Xu Jiayin met Zhang Songqiao through Liu Nuangsheng. Zhongyu Land's business was originally centered in western Chinese cities, including Chongqing, Chengdu, and Guiyang. In 2014, it finally cleared out and divested its Western China assets. In 2016, the company announced that it was fully entering the UK market, and began large-scale acquisitions of British assets. In 2020, Zhang Songqiao used an offshore company registered in the British Virgin Islands, Vision Perfect Global, to purchase the 2-8A mansion from another offshore company, Nunac, located in the Caribbean region. In March 2020, the British government published a document relating to Nunac. I found the original document for you. The file showed that the person controlling Nunac was someone named Yume Ding, born in January 1957, with a usual residence listed as China, but nationality shown as Canadian. Xu Jiayin's wife is Ding Yume, and matching this against public information on the Chinese internet, this Yume Ding was Ding Yume. The document also showed that Ding Yume actually held more than 75% of Nunac. Only after this key clue emerged did foreign media generally conclude that Xu Jiayin was the true owner of the mansion. The Xu family had simply failed to conceal the offshore company's structure thoroughly enough, and the details were still exposed by the British government. Zhang Songqiao's purchase of the mansion perfectly bypassed the mainland regulatory system. As a Hong Kong-listed company, Zhongyu Land was subject to a different regulatory logic from the mainland, and the company had already publicly announced that its business focus had shifted from China to Britain. Doesn't this perfectly match the three conditions I mentioned earlier? Chong multinational company, outwardly reasonable and compliant business, and abundant cash flow, those are These three conditions are also, besides offshore company methods, the basic conditions and the most reasonable explanation for wealthy Chinese people physically purchasing assets abroad. When we see one Xu Jiayin case, it suggests that there may already have been many Xu Jiayins buying property in London through gray methods. Truly wealthy Chinese people hire professional teams to build complex offshore company and equity control structures, hiding deep behind the scenes while controlling their overseas assets. Some of the methods I just described are still in the gray area. Where there is gray, naturally there is black. The classic black method is the underground bank. People who want to transfer domestic assets, first-hand assets, to underground bank intermediaries inside China, then use overseas settlement points to transfer the money into designated foreign accounts. With matched transactions on both sides, the money can be moved out without much visible effort. There is a scene in the TV drama Blossoms Shanghai where Abao and Lingzi meet for the first time in Japan, and Lingzi's father calls asking her for money. The drama did not mention one detail. At that time, many Chinese people working in Japan used underground banks in Fujian to remit money back to China. In 2016, authorities nationwide cracked more than 480 major underground bank cases involving more than 900 billion RMB. Other money laundering tools developed alongside underground banks included Macau casinos and art collecting. Today, let's focus on art. There is an old saying, in troubled times, gold. In prosperous times, collectibles. I do not need to explain the first half. The second half is more interesting. The most recent major upward cycle in China's economy coincided with real estate becoming one of China's pillar industries. Real estate bosses who wanted to clean up their image and shed the label of nouveau riche found that the fastest way to appear cultured was to pursue art. I am glad you also like art and have your own opinions, but it is not only real estate bosses who need art. Fast, rich bosses from every industry need artworks too. At certain historical stages, art can not only preserve and increase wealth, it can also become a very discreet means of money laundering and bribery. A professional operator only needs to sign a contract in advance and buy out all of an artist's past and future works. Then he can deliberately hype the artist's market. Today, at a small auction, one painting sells for RMB 100,000. Tomorrow, that painting can be sent to a national auction and sell for RMB 1 million. The day after tomorrow, it can go to Sotheby's, Polly, Christie's, or Guardian and sell for RMB 10 million. It looks as though you traded only one painting, one work. In reality, you already hoarded and bought out 100 of that artist's paintings in advance. Once the benchmark price of those works is hyped to RMB 10 million, it looks as though one painting is worth RMB 10 million. But in reality, the artist's entire IP has been hyped to RMB 1 billion. In the past, Real estate's bosses would at least find a decent painter, cultivate that person slowly, and wait for the flowers to bloom. Now they have simply moved Lee Sa-ra from the Korean drama The Glory into real life. They do not even bother pretending anymore. They cannot wait, and they do not care how ugly it looks. In The Glory, Lee Sa-ra is turned into a money laundering tool by her father's church. Her own father personally pulls his daughter into the abyss. As long as a painting bears Lee Sa-ra's signature, it can be packaged as the work of a celebrated Korean talent. In the drama, Lee Sa-ra is also a pampered favorite child. If she does not serve as a tool, there is not much else she can do. She cannot really study well enough to get into South Korea's top sky universities. She cannot really paint well either, so she has to find ghost painters to paint for her. Even the works she paints herself are highly formulaic and craftsmanlike. In the end, Lee Sa-ra can only become her parents' best-looking designer handbag. Isn't that what a designer handbag is? Something they carry around from childhood and show off everywhere. I think parents anywhere in the world who truly love their children would not make them into tools this early. Don't you agree? Why, in the last round of money laundering games did celebrities and tycoons choose French winery red wine, modern art, and obscure collectibles as the underlying assets for their operations? Because the market supply of these things can be artificially controlled. Outsiders have no way to calculate their value fairly. The people doing the trading themselves are already inside a small circle, insulated from ordinary people outside. And beneath the wrapping of artistic taste and the shell of culture, what lies inside can be rotten and foul. Beyond the art world, there is another field that people have criticized for a long time: Chinese cinema. I have criticized Chinese cinema countless times before, to the point where I almost cannot find any new way to criticize it. But if you ask me to find examples of money laundering style operations in film, I could make a new special every month without repeating a case. A film project can be divided into 3 stages: pre-production, production, and post-production and distribution. Every stage offers room for manipulation. At every stage, investors can place their own people inside, inflate expenses several times over, designate specific suppliers to increase costs, and then let the money circulate back into the investors' hands. When some domestic blockbusters are marketed, they also like to advertise Hollywood-style visual effects as a mark of pedigree. That not only pushes up the overall budget. If the overseas visual effects team is actually connected to them, the investor can also sign cross-border procurement contracts. Add a respectable label and a shell to the expenditure, and I ask you, hasn't the money then moved out smoothly? When 2 films both claim top-tier special effects and spend the same amount, why does someone else's look like 100 yuan while yours looks like 50 cents? Everyone knows what is going on. This financial game can go one step further in film. Operators can divide a movie's box office revenue rights in different regions into different proportions, package them as different asset bundles, and sell them to other financial institutions or companies. Those buyers package them again, and doesn't that turn them into wealth management products? The film Ip Man 3, during the hottest years of P2P lending, was packaged into a P2P investment project and sold to ordinary older retail investors. In the case involving the chairman of Shanghai Kuailu Group, the mainland China box office revenue rights for Ip Man 3 were turned into an asset package and put into P2P, wealth management, and crowdfunding products controlled through the affiliated networks mentioned in the source. The expected annualized return on these products was pushed to 10%. When bank deposits were yielding only around 2%, wouldn't a 10% annual return drive people crazy? While you think you are coveting someone else's yield, they have already been coveting your principal. Those bastards had already designed a pig butchering scheme for retail investors. Even if the projects blew up, they had already left themselves an escape route. Through complex offshore company structures, they moved the main entities of these companies into overseas jurisdictions, especially the Cayman Islands and the British Virgin Islands, and shifted the ultimate review of cases to the UK's highest court. Creditors who want their money back would have to go to Britain to sue. That alone can drag things out for several more years. Meanwhile, those people can dust off their hands and move to the United States, enjoying themselves while leaving all the mess back at home. When all of these maneuvers are carried out in one continuous chain, how could China's film industry not rot? So if a businessman appears today and says he loves both art and movies, I genuinely find it hard to tell whether he is a human or a ghost. Films and artworks have long since moved beyond their original attributes and become tools for a small group of wealthy people to advertise themselves and carry out gray operations. So students, I do not really need to keep talking nonsense. You can probably tell whether a wealthy person is good or bad. If they are involved in one of these things, maybe it is genuine love. If they are involved in several, then the only thing they truly love may be money. Finally, students, learning has no end. Bye-bye. Looking back at the entire story, what is most thought-provoking is not only the wealthy individuals or the mysterious transactions involved, but also the way money, power, and financial instruments can become intertwined behind industries that seem far removed from finance, from real estate and art to the film industry. According to the figures mentioned in the video, the 28A Rutland Gate mansion in Knightsbridge, London, was once sold for around £210 million, equivalent to nearly $1.9 billion. The documents referred to in the video indicate that Ding Yumei held more than 75% of the shares in the offshore company connected to this property. This is one example of just how complex offshore corporate structures can become when actual ownership is placed behind multiple layers of legal entities. From another perspective, the video also mentions that in 2016, China cracked down on more than 480 major cases involving underground banks, with the total amount involved exceeding RMB 900 billion. Figures like these show that illegal cross-border money transfers were not merely isolated incidents, but could develop into networks operating on an extremely large scale. In the investment sector, what deserves even more caution is the gap between ordinary returns and promises that seem unusually attractive. The video mentions financial products linked to movie box office revenue rights that once advertised expected annual returns of around 10%, while bank deposits at that time offered only about 2%. When a promised return is several times higher than the normal market rate, investors need to ask even more carefully. Where is that return actually coming from? Who is really taking the risk? And if the project fails, who will ultimately lose the money? Perhaps the most important lesson from this story is this. Do not look only at the glamorous surface of a business deal, a work of art, a movie, or a famous public figure. What matters more is the source of the money, the ownership structure, the flow of funds, and the real interests behind it. Art can simply be art, film can simply be film, and investment can simply be investment. But when financial gain becomes the only objective, these fields can also be turned into tools. So what do you think? In your opinion, how should the line between legal business activity, gray area financial operations, and illegal conduct be defined? Share your thoughts in the comments below. Thank you very much for staying with us until the end of this video. If you found this kind of analysis useful, please subscribe to the channel, share the video, and continue following us as we explore more stories about China's economy, society, and the lesser-known realities behind the headlines. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.